Hey there, everyone. Welcome to this week's astrological report. This is for April 28th through May 4 of 2026. I hope you're all doing well. So it looks like this week we continue the Aries stellium. And now the moon has entered Libra for the next 2.5 days, waxing towards the full moon, which will be exact on Friday, May 1st. The moon will then be waning through the sign of Sagittarius. Now this week's going to be intense. It's going to be a lot about money and resources, especially globally on the world stage. And also it's a week of opposition because starting right now, today, the moon is beginning to oppose the first planet in this lineup. So the moon will oppose Neptune, Saturn, Mars, Mercury, Chiron, the sun for the full moon. And then in Sagittarius, the moon will be opposing Uranus and Venus. So a lot of opposition, but for the next couple of days, the moon in Libra will try to find some balance with all this intensity with Aries. It's going to be challenging for that though, and won't be easy because ultimately Mars is the final dispositor of all of these planets. So that means Mars is kind of like the final say and is in charge of everything going on right now. So Mars isn't the most peaceful planet, plus Mars is still pretty close to Mercury, so that can still be a lot of mental agitation. And now we have this new transit of Uranus in Gemini, which is also now being ruled by Mercury. So wherever Mercury goes from this point forward for the next 7 years, it's going to kind of change the flavor of what's going on with Uranus in Gemini. So there can be a lot of mental stimulation, a lot of mental agitation. People can be a little more impulsive with their communications and self-expression. So always kind of be mindful of that. It's going to be challenging for people to hold back. It's already been this way for a while. People speaking their minds. There's been a lot of strong opinions because of Mercury squaring Jupiter. That's the other thing happening this week is Mars is building a square to Jupiter as well. It won't be exact until next Monday for the last aspect on May 4. But even the full moon in Scorpio will be ruled by Mars within a 2-degree square of Jupiter. So I'll be talking about the meaning of that, of course, when I go through the charts and look at the full moon. We also have a lot of Venus aspects this week, including even today, Venus starts to make a trine to Pluto. I'll talk about the meaning of that. And then by tomorrow, Venus makes a T-square to the nodes of fate. We can see here on Wednesday, April 29, there's nothing but challenging aspects. But something very fateful, especially on the world level, United States, and just generally about money, that's going through a change this week that will affect the long-term future. A decision will be made. Something like that will be in the background for individuals as well, and then on the global stage for different places. And then we also see Venus will make a sextile to Saturn. That's going to be one of the easier aspects of the week and very helpful too about money and making decisions. And then these will also affect relationships in general, especially this next 2.5 days as the moon is waxing through Libra. And then Mercury will be building towards the conjunction with Chiron. That will be exact on May 1st on the full moon. So I'll talk more about that, but generally it's about words having extra power this week, which can be either wounding or healing. So you got to be very cautious of how you're speaking to others and how you're speaking to yourself. You can still have an impulsiveness about it, which can kind of lead to more of a challenging dynamic there, especially because everything is being ruled by Mars, which has this impulsiveness about it. Now then, right after that, Mercury will change signs and ingress Taurus, and that's going to, again, change the flavor of what's going on down here in Gemini. Now that Uranus is in Gemini, it's one of the mutable signs. I'm going to talk more about this. I'll probably make some short videos about it and how it's going to affect all the different mutable signs in this new transit for the next 7 years. But generally, it can also affect the nervous system, and just people's minds are going to start thinking very differently and communicating in ways that are different. And let's just say that there's going to be a lot of kind of wild thoughts and communications and ideas about things. We'll get more into that as I go through this report. But ultimately, I think it's this tension that's building. So that can also be more conflict on the way, unfortunately, even on this global world with military stuff coming in perhaps this weekend or by next week. And we all have to be a little more careful of pushing too far, being too assertive, overdoing things. And again, I'll talk more about that as I go through the daily chart. But those are the main aspects for the week ahead. Of course, the main event being the Scorpio Full Moon. So even though Mars is the final dispositor, there will be a break in that. By the time that the moon reaches Sagittarius, the moon will be ruled by Jupiter, and the moon in Cancer is being ruled by the moon. So there'll be a mutual reception there for 2.5 days that will kind of take the pressure off of just Mars being the final boss of everything. It'll still have an opposition in the beginning to Uranus and Venus. All right, so that's what I'm seeing. Things are still pretty intense, as you've seen. The Sun in Taurus, though, even the Sun in Taurus is being ruled by Venus and Gemini next to Uranus, so it's still not the most stable, but the main focus does want to be in your Taurus area of life that wants to show the beginning of how to create new stability for life, especially with your material world, money, resources. But that requires doing things differently and making big changes based on this Uranus transit now with Venus, the ruler, conjunct and moving forward. So again, I think there's things about banks changing, some new policies or something coming out this week that's going to change the overall financial vibes from this point forward. It could turn out to be positive, though, because again, after all these Venus dynamics, Venus makes that final aspect to Saturn, which can stabilize and also be good for contracts or deals and kind of more of a conservative energy for money and Venus and decisions and things like that. All right, so let's go through the daily chart. Starting here on April 28, Tuesday, we see that the moon is currently at 3 degrees, beginning this opposition for the rest of the week. So right now in the morning, depending on where you live, if you're in Europe, it's later in the day, obviously, but moon opposite Neptune starting the day off. It's not going to be easy because Saturn will be the next planet that the moon has to oppose. That's going to be later tonight. So first thing in the morning, the Neptune vibe can be kind of a sense of uncertainty, confusion, taking in too much, drained, not seeing things clearly. But it begins this new mood, with the moon in Libra, of how we can find better balance. I think it's still going to be a challenge for Libra because it's outweighed by all this Aries over here. But that's the goal. That's the need for people, generally speaking, this next 2.5 days is how to create more harmony, more balance with what's going on in your personal life. Now, the moon for the next 2.5 days in Libra is being ruled by this Venus. So it comes back down to Venus in Gemini. That's right next to this Uranus with things being shaken up. And Venus in Gemini wants to be kind of more detached, especially because we have an air grand trine building up this morning with the air signs. These are more about communication and more about social energy, but yet there's still going to be a lot of intensity and even some weight and burden, because of the opposition to Saturn for Tuesday. But there is this moment for late morning, midday, for this grand trine, for things to be opening up and flowing, I think, in a better way, at least socially. Libra can be about one-on-one connections with people, connecting to Pluto, the power dynamic within community and friends, and then making the trine down to Venus and Gemini, which is also more intellectual and up in the head and more communicative and wanting a variety of different things going on today, desires, and the need is to be detached, intellectual, objective, and communicative. And again, trying to begin to find more balance with this intensity that's been going on. So this can also be on the world stage, the need for negotiations and trying to make some deals, which eventually could work out to some sort of a contract or deal by the time we get to the full moon. Because again, that's when Venus will be making a sextile to Saturn. But until then, it'll probably be a little bit challenging to find that diplomacy and that harmony. So the moon in Libra is like, let's play it nice. Let's try to speak in a nicer way, but yet all this Aries wants to be a lot more direct. So kind of an opposition between being direct, more passive, and it can go either way. All right, so the first aspect being that opposition to Neptune. And then as I move this forward, the moon enters that grand trine to Venus and Pluto. So relationships, let's say, are still pretty intense with Pluto, but Venus trine Pluto can have stronger desires, stronger needs, amplified intensity within social activity or relationships, generally speaking. So that's going to be about 5 degrees of the air signs, which kind of leads back to a kite for Neptune and Saturn in the opposition. But even though there's this grand trine, the moon at 5 degrees, it's only a few degrees opposite Saturn. So for the rest of the day, the moon is building that opposition to Saturn, which can also in the background show heaviness and weight and pressure. So the best use of this trine later today is, again, socially making connections with people, emails, networking, in a more detached way. It's not overly intimate. Venus Pluto can be good, can be very strong and intense for romantic energy, but in these signs, it's a little more detached and not as intimate. So that's going to be the easier aspect for the day before we get into a lot of these more challenging aspects by tonight and then tomorrow. So moon waxing forward through the day here. The moon will also make an in conjunction to the north node of destiny by late this evening, afternoon, evening, depending on where you live. So we might have to make some adjustments in our relationships or what we're doing that will affect our future. Or again, we could also be pulled into behind the scenes in our own world, but yet still there's a lot of social energy or connections with others happening. So adjusting between the mood, the feelings, the connections with others, and what we're doing privately that will have an effect on our future as well. So just some sort of an adjustment possibly for some people. And then the moon is also in conjunct to the sun right after that, so that really there's a finger of God that shows up. I would say it's pretty tight. I only use like a pretty strong orb for the finger of God within 1 degree. And it's about, I would say it's close enough. It's not perfect, but I would say 7 or 8 degrees of Libra could be connected to this because it's at the apex. So if you do have 7 or 8 degrees of Libra, there might be something that's fateful that we have to adjust to. And generally, this is an adjustment between what we're focused on, where the sun is, which wants to be more practical, stable, looking at material life, money, resources, the physical side of life, versus what we need to balance out. What's out of balance? We might pick up on that a little bit by this evening when this comes exact. And then there could be something fateful for some people that could have a long-term effect on the future. And then the last aspect for Tuesday will be this opposition to Saturn by tonight. So tonight could definitely feel pretty heavy. It might be a little bit challenging in relationship. Just be aware of that dynamic and know that if you see, somebody not showing, it could just be a mood for some people or a little bit of a weight, a pressure. But again, this is building up to culmination this week, which wants to highlight, it brings things out for us to see. So all this opposition this week can give us more clarity of what we need to do, what we need to change to find better balance in these areas of life. Definitely including your Aries area of life and your Libra area of life. So with that, don't try not to get too down or too depressed or weighed down by something, because this will pass. It's very temporary. And by the time we get through the overnight hours, we're done with that opposition. But then we have a new one as we get to Wednesday on April 29, moon halfway through Libra, still being ruled by Venus. And Venus is approaching that T-square with the nodes of fate for Wednesday. And again, Wednesday has nothing but challenging aspects. It doesn't mean that every single person will have a bad day or challenge, but on the world level, in the background, there's a lot of intensity and weight and pressure, and the day starts off with this moon opposing Mars. So it can also be pretty impulsive for people. It can also stir up, the challenges in keeping things diplomatic and graceful with others. So check yourself. Don't jump headfirst into anything on Wednesday morning, but a lot of people will feel some sort of instinct or impulsiveness to take action on something as well, perhaps. But it can also cause a lot of, agitation with Moon and Mars. And again, there can be opposition in relationships. A lot of people are going to have strong opinions that are still in the background, and they're going to want to push their agenda, push their opinions, and then, you might do something or say something, then you get an opposition to it. It's stuff like that you should just be aware of. So it might come at you, but also make sure you're not kind of instinctively opposing everything you hear or see, and just for the sake of being riled up or something like that. And then the moon is square Jupiter, which kind of activates the square between Mars and Jupiter for the rest of the week. It's kind of like a T-square there. It's not perfect. But now we have even bigger energy because the moon is square Jupiter. There's big needs, big circumstances that could be happening. Things are kind of out of balance, so it's going to be a challenge for this moon all by itself to create that harmony and that balance that we're seeking. And Moon square Jupiter can just show that people are uncomfortable, or again, beliefs about things. There could also be issues here with home. Jupiter's at the apex in Cancer. So family relationships could have a little more tension, or just things could be a little bit overblown, overinflated, too much of something happening. And this is going to be, the afternoon of Wednesday. To just kind of be aware of that dynamic. And it's going to play out with a lot of tension in the world too, with what's happening in different places. Venus is still in charge, but at the same time, Venus is squared the nodes of fate. So whatever happens here on Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday night, it's fateful. It's going to have this strong connection to the future with whatever it is. Or again, some major financial decision will start to come in on some level with either banks or markets. Something's going to go through some sort of a financial change, which will probably culminate with the Scorpio full moon the following couple days. But it starts here with some sort of intense dynamic. There could also be, unfortunately, conflict, violence, even through natural means this week, but also through individuals. Maybe this moon will help a little bit when it's in Libra, but then it's going to come into Scorpio, and that's going to get pretty real and deep and intense as well. So I'm just giving you the astrology, so don't get mad at me if it's not what you're wanting to hear, but this is the way it is. These are the ups and downs of life, and this is just a temporary phase. Even though April, it's been a big one for a lot of people. It's been pretty tough, as you know, for me as well, and for a lot of people. But it's all going to move away, Time is moving pretty fast. We're going to get to May, and more of these planets are going to move out of here, and things will settle down a little bit. But for now, we're still kind of really activated with a lot of emotional tension. And the last aspect will be Venus T-square the nodes by Wednesday night. So again, a fateful dynamic in the air. So this could affect relationships. Make sure you don't do anything that could damage a relationship by being impulsive, saying something impulsively. Remember what I was saying with Mercury building up to Chiron. Words have extra power this week that can hurt people or help heal people. So be wise, think, be objective, step back before acting is my advice. And I have to take it too. I'm human too. So we know the astrology, but that doesn't always mean it's easy to work with it in a mature way. All right, so that is Wednesday. The moon is at the end of Libra until we get to Thursday. On April 30th, the moon is at the end of Libra and starting the day with another opposition, this one to Mercury. So it's also, again, culmination to things that have been building up for a while. And this can be between the heart and the mind, how we're thinking, how we're feeling about things. There's a lot about the self here that we do have to think about and initiate and take action on for what we need to do. And yet, how to find that compromise with others still, or, not just be overly selfish here. Thinking about others versus thinking about the self. But how people feel and how people are communicating are at odds. It's an opposition. So it can add a lot of, again, emotional tension or mental tension in how we are expressing or communicating here first thing on Thursday. If you're in the U.S., by the time you get up, this opposition will probably be past. So a lot of people in Europe will be facing this first thing in the morning there. There can also be something culminating in the way we're thinking and processing information that's been building up. And then the moon has to oppose Chiron at 27 degrees, 27 and a half at this point. So that can also highlight people's sensitivities, insecurities, wounds, vulnerabilities. And Mercury is within a couple degrees already, so it's kind of really activating that idea of words can heal or hurt in an extra powerful way. So be cautious of that. And be extra careful, like this is very easy to get hurt and get in accidents based on not really thinking and just acting. And so just be extra cautious with your physical activity also on Thursday, or really this whole time period, but I think definitely here on Thursday. Now, the mood and the circumstances will change as the day goes on because the moon will be changing signs. In fact, that'll be the next dynamic, is the moon leaving Libra and ingressing Scorpio for the next 2.5 days. And now that the moon is in Scorpio here on Thursday afternoon, it's the beginning of the full moon vibes, even though it'll culminate the following day on Friday. So now that the moon is in Scorpio, it's being ruled by Mars, but everything is being ruled by Mars. It all comes back to Mars, like I said, being in charge. So it has more of an aggressiveness about the vibes in the air right now, what's been going on, obviously. So moon in Scorpio, this is a challenge because this can go in different ways. Scorpio and Libra have this connection to relationship. And so there could be a stronger need for deeper intimacy, deeper connection. But yet here's the moon making an in conjunction down to Uranus, where Venus is in Gemini. That's typically not the most intimate position for a relationship in this phase. People want their freedom, want their space. They don't want to get tied down in this particular phase or be controlled. So power, control issues, undercurrents, manipulation is going to start to show more as we have to make a lot of adjustments in our needs, especially if you're needing people or relationship in some way. So just don't expect too much, don't try to control the dynamic or manipulate people into doing what you want, because there's going to be a lot of unconscious people doing that, especially ones that, aren't aware of the astrology. And then it's also about money, especially the fact that this is building up to a full moon with the sun in Taurus that deals with financial matters. So financial things are coming to a head, beginning to show more and more this week of what's going on out in the world with markets and banks and other changes. Or, again, I'm sure there's going to be things coming out this week about money, investments. It's also about other people's money, other people's resources. This can start to show opposition a lot of adjustment we have to start to make between what we need to, our own personal values, what we want, versus other people's values and what other people want and need of us. It also deals with the deeper side of life. I'll talk more about this as we get to the full moon on the following day, but it's about what's hidden, the occult, what's under the surface. That's, the moon has a lot of light at this point, so it's starting to, the sun is reflecting off that moon, highlighting what's normally deep and private and hidden. So we start to see more and more of what's normally below the surface coming out. But that's also intense. This Scorpio full moon is going to be intense and powerful. Plus, the moon has to build up the square to Pluto. And of course, the moon here isn't very happy. The moon is debilitated in Scorpio. It's not as easy to deal with feelings and emotions. So there's a stronger pull for people to control it, to push it down and hide it and be, manipulative about it all because it doesn't want to be exposed as much, generally speaking. So there's a lot more about kind of a mood that's going deeper, a mood that's more private. And yet that's totally at odds with all this out in front Aries that's more direct, and about the self, not so much about intimacy with others. So the moon doesn't feel like it's very happy in this position. And then, the moon is making those two inconjunctions to Uranus. So there can also be some unpredictability, some disruptions that we have to adjust to as this mood change comes in for Thursday afternoon. And then also the inconjunction to Neptune, this world point, this new reality of what's going on with a lot of projections and issues about beliefs and what's real and what's not real. And that will be the next inconjunction there. And then the final aspect for Thursday will be on Thursday night with the moon squaring Pluto. So Scorpio deals with the taboos. It deals with death and loss, crisis, transformation. And ultimately, this is a lot of intensity for Thursday into Friday. So the moon is clashing with this power dynamic, the mood, the circumstances clashing with this power control dynamic within the group and the community. There could be something that's being forced, a forced change, a forced transformation. Again, be careful of manipulation from others and from yourself. Trying to control situations, and then these undercurrents that are becoming more visible, coming out to be seen as the moon is almost full. All right. And that is the last aspect. So I'd be a little more cautious if you are dealing with anything socially out in the world on Thursday. Looks like, Thursday night, pretty late. It'll be early morning Friday for other places around the world. Probably not the best time to be engaged in like a social friendship event or something. Or there could be social events that go through some sort of a crisis or intensity Thursday or into Friday. And then we move this forward and we get to Friday on May 1st, which is the full moon. Right off the bat, first thing in the morning, the moon is aligned with the nodes of fate in an easier way. So it's a very fateful day. It has long-term effects on the future. There's things that are hidden about it that are affecting our future because, again, it's Pisces behind the scenes, not as visible, and the moon in Scorpio in this deeper way that's also not as visible, although because it's a full moon, it's beginning to illuminate things that are normally deeper and hidden. But again, there's just a fateful dynamic, and it's also connecting to your Virgo area of life where the South Node is. So work, it can affect work and health in some sort of way for the future based on what's happening. At the same time, the moon is in conjunct to Venus. So that's also continuing this clash about intimacy. Venus in Gemini, it's more up in the head. It's more intellectual, more playful, more about freedom and not getting too deep. And the moon is not really into that in this position. So don't expect others to be too overly intimate. Now, it can be different in your own situation based on your transits and your own birth chart and your own relationship. But generally in the air, in the mood, just keep expectations in check with others. And don't expect a lot. Don't expect them to give you a lot of emotional depth here, even though that's a strong need and desire. It still comes back to this aggressiveness with Mars building up that square to Jupiter. There can be too much forcing of something with this full moon. And let's see here, May 1st. So moon in conjunct to Venus and moon in conjunct to Saturn, also having to adjust to our responsibilities, our commitments in some way. This could also be financial, but there's a finger of God aspect. I would say this one's pretty strong, about 9 degrees. So if you have 9 degrees of Scorpio, that's the apex of this finger of God. Again, there could just be a touch of fate about something that's outside of our control, that's going to affect the future, that we have to make a big adjustment to in some way there. And, maybe we don't see it. Maybe not everybody will experience it, definitely. But it's there. And then the full moon. Let me align this perfectly. It's going to be at 11 degrees. Technically 11 degrees. Looks like 20 minutes. That's exact. 11 degrees, 20 minutes. So check your chart, as I say every week. Do you have a personal planet at 11 degrees of Scorpio in your chart? If you do, this full moon is really activating something for you in your personal life, wherever you have Scorpio. And generally, wherever you have Scorpio, which we all have somewhere in our chart, even if we don't have planets there, that area of our life, things are coming to a head. Now, roughly 6 months ago, there was a Scorpio new moon. So things that have been building up for the past 6 months are starting to culminate in that area of life. Generally, it's on this more deeper side of life about sharing of money, sharing of resources with others, partnership and relationship stuff. And it's also, I'm not going to factor in the T-square to Pluto because the moon already did that earlier. It's separating. This moon is separating from that Pluto. The sun has been separating from that Pluto. So it's kind of bringing this intensity, what's been going on in the world as well, beginning to come to a head. It's not just going to be instantly resolved, but things are going to start to show as this will be a turning point for the rest of the week and for what's next. Now, this full moon, if you do have Scorpio in general, like Scorpio Sun, Scorpio Ascendant, your moon there, or other planets in Scorpio, the closer it is to 11 degrees, the stronger it will affect you. But you have to be ready for some sort of a change that this full moon will highlight for you. You might not know about it right now, but by the time you get to this time period and then by the weekend, you might start to see what has come to a head, what needs to change. With the full moon, things need to either end on some level or begin. And usually the full moon will culminate that, show and highlight what it is for people. And it's going to highlight things that are normally very hidden and deep and private that we don't always see. But it's definitely, I would say, a full moon for the financials of the world and what's happening in that way. So again, I think there's going to be some big changes in some way here with policies or rules or laws this week about money. So that's one thing. And then again, the moon is ruled by Mars. And we see that Mars is starting to reach 17 degrees on this full moon. And that's only within 2-degree square of Jupiter. So that's a pretty tight square. So this moon will also culminate this issue of Mars square Jupiter, which could be extra aggressive. There can be, I hate to say this, I'm just trying to be real. I just say what I see in the astrology, but again, this can show issues of death and loss in some levels, or crisis that's happening in the world. It can also maybe kind of initiate a change for military action. Now, normally this wants to kind of turn the corner for energy that's been building up in a military context, but because Mars is in charge and squaring Jupiter, which will only get stronger after this full moon, this could actually lead to some sort of additional conflict. And that's going to be the theme from this point forward, is pushing too hard, overdoing things. Action, aggression could be overly amplified. People could want to fight for their opinions, very strong opinions here. And at the same time, on this full moon, this is where Mercury and Chiron are conjunct, which is what I said about words having extra strength of either healing or wounding people. So we have to be extra cautious on this full moon, not to manipulate and not to force our agenda and go overboard with things. But on a global level, with military and government and what's going on in the world, it'll probably show some sort of aggression that begins to build up through the weekend and into next week when this is exact. So it still has this impulsiveness about it too. And yet the moon is trying to be in control of feelings in the mood, but they're intense and they're powerful feelings. And this is the max emotional phase of the lunar cycle. So this is where feelings and emotions are coming out very strongly for people, which can be impulsive and destructive in some cases. So the more mindful you are, the more you hold back and deal with this in a mature way, the better. But also, there's cases where something needs to break, something needs to come out, whether it's difficult or not, because that will lead to a turning point that needed to happen in some way. Now, the one good thing about this day is that Venus on this full moon is sextile Saturn. Now, the sextile isn't the most powerful aspect out of all this, but at least it's there, and there's a potential, there's an opportunity that this full moon could force something to make, maybe even with Iran or something like that. This could force a deal, force a contract or a solution to something because of some sort of extra aggression that's involved with it. But on a personal level, we can also work with this in a better way, where Venus and Saturn is kind of like, it's helping Venus kind of tone down the fickleness a little bit in this sign, even though it's still kind of close to Uranus too. The changeability for preferences and desires and just how people are, expressing their relationship dynamics with people. I think it helps stabilize that, be a little more mature. Or again, this could be good for making a deal, making a contract in some way on a personal level, even about money, because this full moon has a lot to say about money and resources. So even though it's intense and there's challenges here, I feel like there's a possibility that something good could come out of this. And I hope that's the way it'll play out. But in personal relationship, it's not like, every sextile is different based on the different signs. So Aries and Gemini, it still has a lot to say about the self and what we need to do for us. And it's not as compromising for other people. And because this is really about, even though we still want to be compromising and have good relationships, we're kind of being forced to do what we need to do for the self, even if it's not pretty or easy or comfortable. So this is a pretty big turning point for the week by Friday, and we'll see more and more of the results through the weekend and into next week. So Mercury, Chiron, even the mind, the way people are thinking can have, this wound. Now, I've talked about 27 Aries in my last report, how people that have 27 of the cardinals are going through this rare Chiron transit, which only happens every 49 years. So it can bring up issues that people have on a personal level with wounds or insecurities or just bringing stuff up that needs to heal within this next year. But as Mercury goes through there, the mind could be connected to this, the thinking, words, someone else could say something, that triggers a little bit of that issue. And it'll be triggered in different ways throughout this next year. But it'll also leave 27 soon and, go to 28, go to 29 and enter 0 Taurus and then retrograde back. So it's this year process, and Mercury is going to cross over that. The sun already did. The new moon was right there. So the fact that the new moon was also at 27 Aries, something, is being spoken about that was seeded back on that new moon a couple weeks ago. So I think this is like things coming out, things coming to a head. But just be extra cautious on how you're speaking to yourself and speaking to other people here, especially by Friday. And the last aspect will be the moon in conjunct to Mars. So the moon, really, I would say this moon is mostly just the opposition to the sun. It doesn't have a ton of aspects. So now Jupiter has entered 19 degrees, so it's done with the 18th degree. So if you have Cancer at 19, you get your final Jupiter transit over your personal planet at 19 Cancer. But Mars is going to trigger that personal planet for you coming up soon. So there's still tension involved. I would say, though, Jupiter's trying to expand and enhance something there wherever you have 19 Cancer. But if you have 19 Libra or 19 Capricorn or 19 Aries, then again, you're over amplified. There's too much going on in some way in your life with that for the next week. And that Mars will trigger something for you if you do have 19 cardinal in your chart. All right, so that's the full moon on May 1st. Scorpio full moon. This can be a very transformative full moon based on the results of what comes out. It does feel, though, I'm just going to be real, it does feel like there could be a crisis in some way, either Earth crisis or, other forms of attacks or aggression that will be exposed here. And then also it could expose secrets, expose things that were hidden for people that we didn't know about. So Scorpio, if you have Scorpio in your chart, Scorpio is normally an energy that doesn't want to be as exposed as much, but you have to be prepared that you could be more and more exposed, and wherever you have Scorpio in your chart becomes more and more exposed this week. And again, it's a bigger culmination than just the last 2 weeks. This is a 6-month culmination in your Scorpio area. So that's that. Let's move forward into this weekend. Get to Saturday on May 2nd. The moon is in the last degrees of Scorpio. The moon does make this trine down to Jupiter, so that opens up a few hours there of feeling more supported in this more inner world way. It's better for home and family dynamics or financial dynamics with real estate or property stuff or home and family needs. And that's going to be first thing in the morning. So really relevant if you're in Europe because it's super early here in the United States. And then the moon is in conjunct to Chiron. As the day goes on, it's really not a lot of aspects after that Jupiter trine until the afternoon and evening. Then we finally start to pick up on these other aspects. And again, that first aspect will be in conjunction to Chiron after Mercury had crossed over it. And by Saturday here, Saturday evening, all day Saturday, Mercury is at 29 Aries. This is a super critical degree. A lot of things have happened at 29 Aries, especially in the United States. But there's a sense of urgency. There's a sense that something is about to change. The way people are thinking, communicating is about to change, and we're having to adjust The moon is having to adjust to both of these placements here, adjusting to any kind of wounds or insecurities that came up from that full moon that we noticed. So the mood, the feelings, kind of adjusting to that. And the moon will change. Oh yeah, the moon changes signs. Well, first Mercury changes signs on Saturday night. Mercury ingresses Taurus. So this is a pretty big change now. Mercury's finally building up momentum forward, a wave of things. But now that Mercury's in Taurus, it's being ruled by Venus. And Venus in Gemini is being ruled by Mercury. So we see a mutual reception now between Mercury and Venus. They're helping each other out in a better way. Some people call it generosity in some systems because they're not making an aspect, but it's still a mutual reception in the way I do astrology. So again, that's helpful because it can make Venus stronger. And with Mercury coming into Taurus, the mind wants to kind of settle down, slow down, look at things in a more of a practical way, looking at money and resources, making decisions that's more grounded. And then Venus becomes less fickle, less changeable, but that's still going to be a little bit of a theme because Venus is still in Gemini. That likes changeable things, but Venus in Gemini is also about pleasure up in the mind, up in the head, and thinking and communicating and gadgets. But again, I think that this ultimately is this full moon leads to a financial change in some way. So I think thinking and communicating, it becomes more pragmatic and generally slows down a little bit. But there's still a lot of radical new ideas and thoughts about money and resources, because of this connection to Venus and Uranus. And then the moon will change signs Saturday night and ingress Sagittarius. So now the moon is waning from that full moon. So as soon as the moon comes into Sagittarius late on Saturday night, it'll be Sunday morning for other people in the East Coast or Europe. Now the moon, as we get to Sunday on May 3rd, we wake up with it in the sign of Sagittarius ruled by this Jupiter. So now we have another mutual reception going on. So two different mutual receptions, which again, I think is helpful to kind of start to bring things into a better balance that full moon led to these changes that were necessary. So now there's bigger feelings, bigger needs. Moon coming into Sag out of Scorpio is generally a more uplifting moon phase. Although there's rare situations that it can still show challenge for good or bad. It's just the feelings, the needs become bigger, more amplified. And not only that is now every time the moon goes through the cardinal signs, it's picking up on this Uranus. So moon is also opposing Uranus, which can show some disruptions, some radical thoughts and ideas, and the beginning of these changes to people's beliefs and thoughts and what's true and what's not true. Because again, I've said it so many times, but with Neptune in Pisces, it affected all of the mutable signs and distorted things and diluted things and created just a lot of imaginative situations about truth and belief and faith and understanding and distortion to data and information and news and media and distortion to health. That's one thing that I also think is going to change over this next 7 years. I'm skeptical of all these different diets and health advice that's been coming out for the last 14 years. There's so many different contradictions between doctors and thoughts and ideas about things, and it's confusing. And now with Uranus in Gemini, it's going to oppose Sagittarius, truth and belief, and revolutionize it and change it from the past, and then square Pisces, and square Virgo. So there's going to be a lot of health changes in the world with what they say is right or wrong and what we should be doing. But it's not going to be easy at first. It's going to be chaotic. And people are going to start going through this change of perception about things. And it may not just be truth. Doesn't mean it's just going to be all of a sudden everybody is right and thinking correctly about things. There's still going to be a lot of distortions that we have to work out over this next 7 years before it all kind of settles down into a more mainstream-like flow of a certain idea of things. But again, there can be a little bit of a wildness now, a little bit of a craziness. And this is also 2 signs that like freedom and independence, that will be a stronger need. So just expect a little bit of turbulence or volatility or change as we come into Sunday morning for a new mood phase. And generally here, again, people, now that the moon is in Sag, it's in better alignment with all this Aries, but we just have, these final oppositions to get through before I think things settle down more and more. Although, again, that Mars is still building up a square. So now that the moon is in Sagittarius, people's needs and feelings could be bigger and more amplified, which could just, intensify this Mars-Jupiter square to be even stronger. People taking action, overdoing it, pushing their agenda with beliefs and their philosophy and opinions about things. It's definitely going to be strong opinions. Luckily, the moon is also in conjunct to Mercury, so we're having to adjust, with that big mood and those big feelings and thoughts about things to this more like keeping it calm, keeping it more peaceful, trying not to get too carried away. But that's still going to be difficult with Mars, this impulsiveness, beginning that square, perfecting to Jupiter. So the moon in Sag can also have a stronger need for adventure, travel, exploring, seeking things, learning, teaching. There could be a stronger need here to learn new things, an interest, a pull into learning new skills, having ideas about something new in your life that you would like to be doing. And it can deal with culture issues coming up, strong opinions still, though. Again, I think that'll be the biggest dynamic. And then the moon is trine Neptune and sextile Pluto for Sunday, first half of the day, Sunday morning, really. So trine that Neptune, we're more in alignment with our own visions, our own dreams and inspirations, our own fantasies, our own illusions. And then moon sextile Pluto has a better connection to the group and the community and the power dynamic. So it creates a connection to the social side of life. There's beginning to be this in conjunction from Pluto to the south node, but it's not perfect yet. Also, Pluto is beginning to slow down. It's very slow because it's going to go retrograde soon. So it's more amplified, more intense, also connected to that full moon that we had. But the moon, people's comfort level just seems to be in a little better way with the power dynamic at this point. And things are probably easier, but yet still so intense because of this Mars square Jupiter. That could also be Earth events too. So sometimes when the moon comes into Sag, things are over the top. I've even seen wildfires really take off. In fact, one of the worst wildfires in history, the moon came into Sag, and just everything was way overblown, over the top. And so I would say that there's a stronger chance from this point forward of conflict or destruction, either with Earth events or through individual action. And the moon is also T-squared the nodes of fate for Sunday, so it's a fateful day, whatever is happening. We can just look at the chart here. We see this big T-square plus the square from Mars. So this looks like there could be something happening that has a long-term effect on the future in some fateful way. The last aspect, though, will be the moon trine Saturn. So this is where we're in better harmony with our responsibilities, what we need to do and commit to. better way with this, even though there's all this Aries, again, there's been a lot of tension in this because of Saturn that's slowing things down, but there's such a strong need to take action and make things happen quickly. So that frustration has been in the background for a lot of people. But now with that moon trine Saturn, we just feel a little more comfortable with the pace of things happening perhaps. But that's only a temporary few hour aspect. The bigger dynamic is the Mars square Jupiter. And again, that's going to peak on the following day as we get to Monday on May 4. The moon is halfway through Sagittarius. And we get the final opposition of this week with the moon opposite Venus. So it's culminating a lot about relationship and financial things that have been going through changes. But at the same time, the moon is as far away from the pleasure as possible. So there's opposition with needs and desires and preferences and feelings. So it may be a little bit challenging to get everything we want or feel completely satisfied in this moment. But it's temporary and it leads to a change for that. And then the moon is also in conjunct the sun. So once again, the mood, the feelings in our inner world is at odds with where the focus is, which is on the practical, the materialistic, what's stable and secure, what people need for pleasure and comfort, versus the moon in Sagittarius, which is more about what's above and beyond the physical life. So adjusting between, these two different areas. And then the moon is trine Mars as the day goes on for Monday afternoon, Monday evening. Opens up this outlet for easy flow of action for good or bad. And this is where we got to be extremely careful of what we're fighting for, because it shows that it may not be the right thing to do with Mars squaring Jupiter. What are you literally fighting for? Are you willing to die on this hill for something, Make sure it's the right thing. Make sure it's what you really want to get wrapped up into if you're in some sort of a conflict or pushing your agenda. But it feels like action and aggression is over the top. It's also about, again, fighting for beliefs, especially because the moon is in Sagittarius, all about faith and belief and truth. So people could be really fighting for what they think is true. It doesn't mean it necessarily is true. There's a lot of distortions to people's opinions, that's for sure. But at the same time, there's this opening to really take big action. So be careful of jumping into things head first. There could also be conflict with homes and family stuff here, property. Again, it could be earth events possibly showing some destructive event. Hopefully not. I really hope it doesn't. But the odds go up with something like this. So, generally it's about the self too. Our individuality, our freedom, what we want and what we need to do for the self could be totally at odds with what the family needs or what's going on with the home dynamic on Monday. But it could also be war or conflict, a military aggression or other individual conflict showing. And the moon is also in conjunct to Jupiter at the same time. So it's kind of a messy dynamic. There's all these different things here happening all at the same time for Monday afternoon. I mean, it could be any time on Monday, but it's all kind of peaking here. Depending on where you live in Arizona, it's, the 1 o'clock hour, it looks like 1 to 2 o'clock hour. So the evening in the East Coast, and it'll be Monday night if you're in Europe. So this Mars square Jupiter is the last aspect of the week. And if you have 19 degrees, like I was saying before, of the cardinal signs, you're really wrapped up into this. My chart ruler, Jupiter in Aries, is exactly at 19 degrees, man. I've just nonstop transits to my chart in difficult ways. Right now, the Mars is squaring my moon. Saturn is opposing my Pluto and my midheaven. There's all kinds of stuff that shows challenges, and that's how life is. Like, transits really show what a person is going through if you know your chart and you can read it. So just try to tone it down a little bit. Try not to go overboard is my advice on this for anything that's happening. But it's not always us. Sometimes life throws us things that we have no choice but to deal with. And when I see astrology like this, I also use it to my advantage where I don't take a risk during some situations in the astrology. Like to me, this says, for me personally, be extra careful if I'm out riding my motorcycle on this day. I probably will kind of pass on, riding on this day, on Monday, because the odds go up if it's aligned with me for an accident or something difficult. So astrology can really help us when we know what's going on and we make decisions based on the astrology. It's a fine line, though. It's tricky because we don't want to deny life at the same time. But when it comes to Mars aspects, the dangerous aspects, I usually will take that into account when I'm doing things. So maybe you can too, and it'll be helpful for you. So that's what I have for you for this week. Thanks for watching. Appreciate all the support to my channel. And I hope you guys have a great week ahead. Take good care.